But let's dive into this match day, and I think it was a really fascinating match day. We got a huge treat on Friday with Dortmund against Leverkusen, which I thought was a fascinating match. We saw the lineups come out early, and Nuri Sahin had to put together a makeshift defense that included young defenders Kappa and Lures, Riasson as a centre back, Jan Kutu playing as a right back. It was a mess of a back line that very quickly started falling apart. Leverkusen I think actually they did the smartest thing possible. They attacked from the get-go, putting pressure on this back line, testing them right away, and it didn't take long, and it all fell apart. And you look at this final scoreline, it's 3-2, and I think to myself, that really flatters Dortmund in many, many ways. I think when you look really back on the events and the way they took place, the Dortmund penalty, the fact that Leverkusen wasn't given a penalty, which I think was a clear penalty, this could have been a scoreline that was easily also could have ended up 5-1 for Leverkusen, Stefan.
Yeah, absolutely. It was an interesting game. It wasn't what I expected at all, really. I thought this was going to be a very tight, very defensive game. I thought we'd see Leverkusen approach the game much like they played against Bayern. And I thought we'd see Dortmund approach the game much like we saw them play against Bayern. And that was when both teams put on really kind of solid defensive performances. That's kind of how Leverkusen set up. They didn't start Florian Wirtz. He was on the bench. They only actually technically started with two forward players. If you still count Grimaldo and Frimpong as technically defenders, then Nathan Tella and Patrick Schick were the only forwards on the pitch. Obviously, in practice, it's a lot more tacky than that because Grimaldo and Frimpong are more or less wingers in this system. And you're right. I mean, I think there was a degree of luck for Leverkusen in the sense that Nathan Tella managed to just score that absolute screamer, which was, at the end of the day, an outstanding volley. I think during the live broadcast, I think the Bundesliga, they have this kind of weird statistic they use from AWS, which is like goal probability. I think it's just their version of XG, to be honest. And they said there's like a 5% chance of him scoring that goal or something, whatever that may mean. I think it's just a technical way of saying,
Stefan, 0.05 XG.
0.05 or whatever. Yeah, well, 0.05 is 5%, so that would make sense, yeah. It's just a numerical way of saying, and it was a beautiful goal, really. And so it was also the worst case scenario because it was Dortmund trying to pass out defence. They kind of fumbled it. The ball actually just kind of bounced into Nathan Tella's path from what was like just a header back up the pitch. Scores a screamer. Leverkusen score another two or three very quickly later. And, I think, as I said at the time on social media, the game was basically finished after 7 minutes. And yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think Leverkusen more or less controlled the game. Dortmund definitely came back into it in the second half for sure. Gittins obviously got the first goal in the first half, which is a wonderful kind of nice dinked finish from him. And then Dortmund obviously went on the second half. But over and over and over again, Leverkusen just had so much joy just kind of breaking through that backline against Dortmund. And if I was a Dortmund fan, I would have been a little frustrated with it because there's nothing to be done when you have so many players out injured. And of course, I think we should probably point out that a lot of players are missing to sickness, which they got just before the game. So there maybe wasn't much to be done for it. But I was kind of watching that game, and I described it on social media as Postecoglou, obviously in reference to Ange Postecoglou, the Tottenham manager, because here Dortmund were with, an unmitigated disaster in terms of team selection, in terms of not having any defenders. They had to call up young players. And instead of Sahin trying to change his system to play more defensively, he just kind of played with the exact same system as if he did have Schlotterberg and Anton in defence. And it obviously didn't work because it meant these defenders had to go one-on-one against Patrick Schick, Frimpong, Nathan Tella. And not just Patrick Schick, an informed Patrick Schick, who, as I said at the time during the game, I think when he's at this level is one of the best strikers in the world. He's one of the toughest strikers to defend against because he's got a degree of speed. He's not very pacey forward by any means, but he's not slow. Physically, he's outstanding. His close control is outstanding. His movement is just outstanding as well. And I was just quite taken aback by how little support Dortmund gave their own back line, because they looked good going forward. They created chances going forward, but it was all built on this really shaky foundation. And it meant whenever Leverkusen had to, they just kind of walked down the pitch and scored a goal. So I completely agree with you. By the end of the match, yeah, Dortmund's winning the ascendancy. They had their tails up because Leverkusen simply had no interest in kind of doing any more attacking. They knew the game had been won. And yeah, maybe they hung on a little bit towards the end of the game, but it was, I think, in the end, a relatively comfortable win for Leverkusen considering the circumstances. And I think Xabi Alonso would have been delighted to have picked up 3 points to that easily, considering going into the game, I think Leverkusen would have probably taken a point, Manu.
Yeah, no, I think so. I just looked up Patrick Schick's statistics here because as you were talking and you talked about him being a world-class striker. So this is now 11 goals in 13 games across just 563 minutes. So he's been scoring every 51 minutes for Leverkusen this season. With his limited game playing time, he's now 4th in the goal-scoring chart behind Harry Kane, Omar Mamouche, and Johnny Burkhardt. He's actually doing something really similar than Schick, scoring a lot of goals with very limited minutes. So, Johnny Burkhardt definitely someone to keep an eye on as well. But yeah, I think that's also just the difference, isn't it? I feel that whenever Leverkusen had to, they just went out of third gear into fourth or fifth gear briefly. And it felt like the entire match that they were playing in third gear. They were doing what they needed to do. It felt a little bit like game management. They knew that there was another big fixture coming. They realized very quickly, here's Dortmund. This backline is a mess. We don't really have to worry too much about it. And so we're just going to do what we need to do. I mean, Xabi Alonso even had the luxury of, using a small disciplinary measure against Florian Wirtz and leaving him on the bench. This story, of course, is not a big deal. Him and Palacios came late to the final video session ahead of the match, right? Because they were stuck in traffic jam. So it wasn't even their own doing, but it was still, it felt kind of like Xabi Alonso looked at the schedule and saw Borussia Dortmund and said, yeah, I can afford doing a small disciplinary action here against Florian Wirtz and Palacios because we might not even need those. It's only Dortmund, but you know what? It's a joke, but it's also kind of true, isn't it? And especially this Dortmund team. And, a lot of Dortmund fans will say, look, yeah, we got hit by the injury bug or the sickness and ravaged our dressing room and the backline wasn't what it was supposed to be. But they also spent another 30 million euros on an extra striker when they really needed another centre back, right? And this is something that's avoidable. And this isn't the first game where we've seen this. We've seen Emre Can help out the centre back before the winter break. And then during the winter break, nothing was done to alleviate the situation. So this isn't like Dortmund, were hit here and it's all bad fortune. It is also part of the lack of squad planning, I would say, that there isn't just an extra centre back in there that you could throw in a situation like that. And, I know plenty of Dortmund fans that have been calling out for the club to sign another defender.
Well, they've been linked with 2 or 3 defenders here in the UK this week. So it looks, I mean, I posted a meme in the weekend of that meme of, it's obviously some infomercial in America where there's a water tank and it's burst and the guy slaps tape on it. It's that meme. If you know what I'm talking about, you'll know what I'm talking about. And the meme, and I basically made the joke that every time Dortmund need, a player for the squad, they just go pick up some Manchester City youth player. And sure enough, they've been linked with 2 or 3 of them. So who knows what will happen there. But
before you keep going, can McAtee defend?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure about that. But it is a kind of tale of 2 squads, isn't it? In the sense that Dortmund didn't have 2 central defenders to rub together, if you will. Whereas if you look at Leverkusen bench going into the game, Alex Garcia, a very experienced central midfielder who was technically brought in to replace Xhaka long term, but hasn't quite done it yet. Jonas Hoffmann, Bundesliga veteran who can't get into the team because other players are playing well. Palacios on the bench has done very well. Martin Thierry, the inside forward they signed from Ligue 1, who hasn't quite got going yet, but again, another experienced player. And then, as you mentioned, of course, Florian Wirtz, who didn't come on until the second half. And I think that's probably quite telling. That's maybe yes, okay, Dortmund are missing, they're missing Schlotterbeck, Chan, Anton, Benzbaini, Niklas Sula, a lot of players there. But I think if Dortmund really want to get serious in the Bundesliga over the next couple of years, they have to take a look at the benches to the likes of Bayern, Leverkusen, maybe Leipzig to an extent, Frankfurt. I think have done a good job this over the last couple of years. Stuttgart obviously picking up a lot of players in January as well because they need to bolster that squad. This is no longer a sport where you can just have like 13 or 14 decent players. It's almost, major like top leagues in European football are competing in the Champions League every year. You more or less need like an NFL squad, to maybe not quite to that extent, or like almost like an ice hockey team where you could have two starting 11s to almost play. And I feel like Dortmund are still kind of juggling with that idea. Whereas you look at that Leverkusen team, and you can see they've more or less got players for every position in backup. So it did strike me as a game where you can really poke too many holes at anyone in particular in the Leverkusen team. Sorry, the Dortmund team. It wasn't as if like Brand had a bad game or Adeyemi had a bad game or Guirassy or anyone. I thought everyone was okay. It's just the fact that the squad kind of let them down, and it has been letting them down for much of the season. And it's meant that they kind of started the year rather pretty poorly. But I guess we'll see what they can do this week against Holstein Kiel.
It's the first defeat to open a calendar year in 20 years, right? At home, I should add. And it's the first, I don't have that statistic in my head, but it's the first time they've lost on a Friday in a really long time as well. And I think for Leverkusen, this is a massive result because it kept up the pressure on Bayern Munich. And, as I was listening to you describing here the squad sizes, and I think that is definitely something that is increasingly becoming more and more important. We started a podcast talking about fixture congestion, right? And how many games there's being played now. And then you look at, for example, what Bayern Munich and, as you said, Stuttgart and also Leverkusen. Leverkusen are in the market for another defender because they had Balogun, he has picked up an injury, right? So now they're looking for another defender as well. And that's despite the fact that they have pretty good depth. Bayern Munich went into the season and brought back Stanisic and bought Ito, right? Both of them have been out, and yet they still have enough depth. That just shows you, that you need 5 or 6 players for your core positions in this sort of calendar, because injuries, sickness, especially this time of the year, with all these games and everything that's going around, this can really easily happen. So yeah, this is I guess is something that Dortmund will have to address. For Leverkusen, this is a fantastic result. I think the title race is now fully on. They're going to keep up the pressure on Bayern Munich. Then they navigated this really difficult fixture with flying colors.